The Creeping Fog 1. The black fog clung to Jacob as he rode into the village. Thick tendrils of fog swirled and eddied around him, forming cryptic shapes that reminded him of heroes and villains from his collected tales. Jacob shooed away flies and squinted through the haze, searching for any signs of life, but not finding any. He coughed and cleared his throat and was beside himself with the smell of putrid flesh and blood. Limbs and heads were scattered about. Men and women lay in unnatural positions. Others lay butchered and twisted, their eyes gouged and their mouths hanging open. "Wilhelm, where are you?" His hand instinctively moved to rest on the hilt of his dagger. Long and deep shadows shook and shuddered with hidden menace, as if the darkness held secrets of the unknown and unknowable. Jacob could feel his heart racing as he scanned the abandoned streets of the village for something, anything, and he found nothing. There was an oppressive silence, save for the caw of crows and the wind howling through small, crumbling stone homes. Something was watching him. He could feel it in his bones. Just as he seemed ready to call out his brother's name, a tiny figure sprang from the shadows, startling his horse so that it reared and almost thrust him to the ground. The Creeping Fog 2. "Whoa!" Jacob struggled to stay in his saddle. He held on tightly and waited for the horse to calm down, and when it did, he turned to a young boy in tattered clothes, who was no older than 10. The boy shifted nervously and stared up at Jacob with frantic eyes. He was in shock, trying to discern whether Jacob was real or a figment of his imagination. Jacob swung down from the saddle and approached the boy, his hands raised in a placating gesture. He meant no harm. He just wanted to understand what had happened to the village. "Steady, young friend. I wish you no harm," he murmured as he edged closer to the boy. "What happened here? Who attacked the village?" The boy trembled. His lips quivered as he stared at Jacob and struggled with his words. They're gone," he whispered. "The fog, it took them." Jacob's brow furrowed. He didn't understand. The boy was describing the fog as though it were a living thing. He kneeled to the boy's level, ignoring the chill seeping into his bones from the damp and bloody ground. "What's your name, boy?" Jonas," the boy stammered. "Calm yourself. I need you to tell me what happened here." And as the boy considered his words, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had befallen this village was far beyond his understanding. The Creeping Fog 3. Jonas's words tumbled out of his gasping mouth, his small frame shaking like a tree in a storm. "It was Father first. He went out to check on the sheep but never came back. Then others started disappearing too. When I looked out from the barn, I couldn't believe what I saw. The fog taking my aunts, uncles, and cousins, as if a living snake from the depths of hell." Jacob's face hardened. He had heard strange tales about a fog in the Black Forest, acting as a doorway between worlds, but he had never heard of it devouring people. "How many were you in the village?" 34. Jacob nodded. "I have heard many stories about the fog, and I believe with all my heart we will find your father and the others." The boy's eyes widened with hope. Suddenly, the air around them shifted. The fog began to churn and roil like a pot of boiling molasses. Jacob's hand instinctively went to his dagger. Words caught in his throat. Jonas raised a hand and pointed a trembling finger towards something in the approaching fog. Grotesque forms that defied description emerged from the molasses like nightmares given form. Motionless, Jacob stared at the fog as creatures from all the cautionary tales he and his brother had collected began to take shape. He closed his eyes and muttered silent words of hope. The Creeping Fog 4. Jacob opened his eyes and reached for the dagger at his belt. He stopped breathing, his eyes widening as he absorbed the advancing darkness. Then, from the encroaching fog, a tendril shot toward Jonas, curling around his ankle like a deadly snake. Suddenly, the boy released a blood-curdling scream, and Jacob lunged forward, but it was too late, and Jonas was instantly yanked away and dragged into the deadly fog as his terrified cries faded into the murk. Cautiously, Jacob went after him, pushing forward into the darkness. It wasn't long before he came upon a monstrous almond tree he half remembered from a fairy tale. It had rotting human limbs as branches, and on those branches dangled 34 heads caught in agonizing screams. Jacob continued through the fog after the boy, swinging his dagger in wild arcs, slicing through the vicious tendrils that reached for him, his movements growing increasingly desperate with each passing second. "Boy, where are you? Speak!" As if in answer, a tendril wrapped around Jacob's wrist. Instantly, he yanked his arm away with a scream. Then he heard something. Something familiar. A voice. It came again and again. "Jacob, help me, brother!" Jacob froze. "Wilhelm?" He peered into the darkness. "Wilhelm!" The Creeping Fog 5. "Wilhelm!" Jacob yelled. "Where are you?" No answer came. Only the sound of his ragged breathing and the inhuman howls of creatures moving through the fog came to him. Each creature appeared more menacing than the last, as if the fog were inspired by his memories, pulling from a palette of horrors from his fairy tale collection. "Brother, where are you?" Jacob muttered, evading a tendril. "Is this what I get for playing hero?" He remembered their childhood games, and how he'd always play the role of hero in whatever imaginary story they had concocted. There had been so many games, so many stories. He sighed and hoped Wilhelm was okay, wherever he was. As he thought about Wilhelm, tendrils of fog suddenly wrapped around his legs. With a start, he contorted his body and swung his dagger in wild, chaotic arcs, making the tendrils disappear. Still, his movements became increasingly desperate as the tendrils continued to manifest and slither up his body, crushing his chest and lungs. Was this how it ended? Suffocated by fog, attacked by the shadowy creatures from the tales he and his brother had spent their lives collecting? No. His story couldn't end like this. Their story couldn't end like this. With this thought, he summoned every ounce of strength left within, and with a terrible roar, he twisted and broke free from the fog's stranglehold. Instantly, he stumbled backward, gasping for air, the fog suddenly dissipating before his very eyes. Within moments, the village stood silent, bathed in dying sunlight. There was no sign of the horrors that had assailed him just moments before. Somewhere, his horse nickered to let Jacob know he was okay. Jacob took a calming breath and ran a shaky hand through his sweat-soaked hair. He looked down at his dagger in his white-knuckled grip. No blood, no gore, nothing. Just clean steel. He didn't understand any of it. Then he felt the presence of things unseen observing him, measuring him, relishing his suffering. He had no idea how to explain it, nor did he think it could be explained. But what he felt was toyed with, like the fog were a giant black cat playing with a wounded mouse. I'm losing my mind, he thought to himself. The fog isn't alive. It isn't watching me. I've heard too many stories, and my imagination is getting the better of me. This carnage has nothing to do with fog. Perhaps an attack from a neighboring village. Perhaps revenge. Perhaps a feud. Perhaps something else. Jacob didn't want to think about it as he made his way to his horse, his boots scuffing the dirt. Fear and frustration knotted inside him. He was exhausted and more scared than he had ever been in his life. Yet he refused to return home without his brother. And so, Jacob pushed the fear out of his mind and remembered the good nights. The nights when his father would keep them up wide-eyed with wonder, with stories by the crackling fire. The stories had captivated and inspired them, so much so that they would spend the rest of their lives chasing stories and sharing them with the rest of the world. Reaching his horse, Jacob grabbed the reins and swung himself into the saddle. Then, scanning the village one last time, he muttered a silent prayer for the boy and nudged his horse forward just as a songbird landed on his horse's nose. The bird glanced at him for a long moment before taking flight, guiding him toward the outskirts of the village, where the road ahead vanished into a dense, shadowy tree line. "Hold on, Wilhelm," he thought. "I'm coming for you, brother." And as he passed beneath the first trees, darkness enveloped them, so that Jacob's hand instinctively tightened on his dagger, ready for whatever horrors might wait in the depths of this dark, twisted fairy tale.